Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. It's Effie. I haven't recorded one of these YouTube chats in a while with a member in the arthritis community, but I'm really happy that I have Lena Anderson here. She's a writer, author, disability and health advocate, and you may have seen her on RA Health Central, Creaky Joints, and many other places, including her blog, The Seated View. And I'll include all her links below in the description box of this video if you want to connect with her, and I'm sure you will after this chat. So welcome, Lena.
Thank you so much.
I know you guys will really find what she has to say valuable and relatable. And we're going to be talking about her book as well, which I have here, Your Life with Rheumatoid Arthritis. And we'll get to that in a minute. But Lena, I want to talk a little bit about you, your RA journey, and you as a person aside from your illness and your disability and diagnosis and whatnot. Because as we know, we're more than our illnesses. And I think you're a testament to that with what you're going to share today. So I'll let you take the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, I think just going to kind of start off on that is absolutely one of my key messages is that you have a life and RA is part of it, but it is not all of it. Like sure, it takes over at times, but for me, the goal has always been to create a good life. And I've had practice. I've lived with juvenile idiopathic arthritis, which used to be called juvenile rheumatoid arthritis because it's so similar to RA. And I lived with that since I was just a child, so over 50 years now. And I had the first symptoms when I was 4, got diagnosed at 9. So yes, that was the going from doctor to doctor. No one called me crazy, but they did call my mother crazy. And suggested she see a psychiatrist because clearly there was nothing wrong with her child, nothing at all. Until we finally found somebody who could diagnose me. I was born and raised in Denmark, and I moved to Canada when I was 20-ish years old. And I would say as an advocate, my work as an advocate really kicked off once I found my online community. Because until then, I hadn't really, outside of when I was in hospitals, I hadn't really met anyone like me. And the internet really kind of changed that in a massive way. It felt like that whole feeling of meeting other people's other people like you who know exactly how you feel is an incredible feeling. So I did do some pre-internet, I did do some work with the Arthritis Society here in Canada. But my goals were often a little different, which I'm sure we'll get into later. Because I've had this condition for so long, I have a kind of unique, semi-unique view of the history of RA and RA treatment. I grew up in what I half jokingly call the dark ages of rheumatology, where there really were no effective treatments. I tried prednisone, which is not a sustainable thing, especially when you're a child and still growing. I tried gold injections, which I'm not sure they do anymore. Yeah. And it didn't do anything. I developed side effects. I tried aspirin for pain. Surprisingly, didn't work much. So I kind of have tried it all. I still remember the first time I got an NSAID, like an anti-inflammatory medication. At the time, it was like an experimental drug in Denmark. And I remember, I wouldn't say it was a miracle drug. That once we get to biologics,
Yeah.
that's my miracle drug, but it worked so much better than aspirin. And really for a really long time, my RA was quote unquote treated by massive doses of NSAIDs, which has, side effects. My stomach is a wreck because of it, because of decades on this drug. And I know even though I haven't taken them in almost 20 years now, I am still carrying like certain of the side effects.
You mentioned you ended up going on a biologic, and you wrote about that in your book too, and how, you remember the first day of how your doctor gave you that injection and you went and took a nap. and then you woke up like completely feeling like a different person. You want to like share a little bit about that? Because I know there's a
Sure.
lot of people who are scared to take medications for
Mhm.
RA, and
Mhm.
really give a lot of encouragement and hope and motivation in your book, which is,
Mhm.
something I wish I had when I was diagnosed, to
Mhm.
actually go forth and treat the disease and not be scared
Mhm.
of medication.
Mhm. Well, and I think it's from a bigger view, like I think I have that historical view of what happened before treatment,
Yeah.
where it was pretty inevitable that you would have visible signs of illness like joint changes, that you would end up in a wheelchair. At that time, most did. And coming to where we are now, which is thanks to effective treatment, where RA is increasingly becoming an invisible illness, it just blows my mind. It just
Mhm.
blows my mind, and it's something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, so it gives me a lot of hope
Yeah.
for the future. But my experience was that I had been on methotrexate, which didn't work for me because of the carryover from the NSAIDs. My stomach is a wreck, and any side effects tend to involve my stomach. And I couldn't take methotrexate at high enough doses to control my RA. So I went off it, and we applied for funding. My doctor and I applied for funding for a biologic, and that process is much faster these days. But at the time, it took 8 months, and I just had this humongous flare,
Mhm.
um, and it just got worse and worse. And I refer to it as it ate my life. It just took everything I could do, any energy I had. The pain levels were out of this world, and at the end, I quite felt like I had almost terminal arthritis, that I would either die or I would end up in a nursing home hopped up on opioids. So I was going to lose my life, both in either in the literal or the metaphorical sense.
Mhm.
So, and then on in the year, I think early January in 2005. I'm so used to saying 20 that I go, how do I say
Yeah.
it? Okay, 2005. I got the good news. I went to see my doctor, who gave me the first shot. I can't due to joint changes, so I can't do it myself. And it literally was, I went home, and when I woke up 2, 3 hours later, I could feel that it was working. It was, there are some of the biologics that may kick in really quickly. Most of them take about 3 months to kick in.
Mhm.
But this was the one that at the time had a reputation for working really quickly. Which it did. Like, it was a different person. Like, people have asked me to explain how did I know it was working, and I felt better. I felt a little bit lighter. There was just a sense of I'm not the same person anymore. Something is happening, and it took a long time to come back and build stamina and build energy. But yeah, I went into remission and have been in remission since. So that's 19 years now. That's why I call them the miracle drugs. And that is why, compared to my previous life, I am such a proponent of medication. Like, you can't you can't change this with the powers of your mind. I know some people respond to, for instance, diet changes, exercise, and so on, but it is a chronic progressive illness, and medications are your friend.
Yeah. And you mentioned that in your book too. That was one of the chapters where you have to
Mhm.
sort of kind of befriend the medication. I know there's some people, like you said, like who've been able to heal their, RA through like nervous system regulation or diet and whatnot. But that's only like dependent on the person,
Yeah.
and I feel like those people have always had a mild case to begin with.
Mhm.
I was diagnosed with a
Yeah.
moderate to severe case, and
Mhm.
it's very, a doctor told me once, I wish you saw me in the beginning years, in the beginning days
Mhm.
of your diagnosis, so we can really hit it with the holistic
Mhm.
methods. And because it's like once that fire starts, it's very hard to control it
Yeah.
just by meditating or eating
Yeah.
well. It's very difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and I think especially, and it also underscores the value of early and aggressive treatment, because by the time most people get like notice that something's wrong, that fire, as you described it, may have been simmering for a while.
Same here.
And it takes like a small fire you can put out with less effort and less medication, or maybe with diet changes and so on. But once you get into a medium or
Mm.
roaring fire, you need like, it's a serious illness for, and you need serious efforts. I once heard, I watched a keynote speaker, one of Canada's top rheumatologists, saying that RA is a medical emergency because the faster you deal with it, the better your chances of going into remission. But unfortunately, because of all the structural things like lack of rheumatologists, the requirement to move slowly, like go start with a lighter medication and then not get to the big boys, if you're waiting, or big girls, or say biologics, people end up, it becomes harder and harder to go into remission. I heard another rheumatologist said that that he and his colleagues, if they had it their way, they would start on biologics, because they can stop it and you can go into remission.
I really love the quote that you put in your book here, and I want to kind of talk about this because I feel it will, kind of resonate with a lot of people in terms of like how people call themselves arthritis warriors or they're fighting RA. And I don't know if you necessarily like those terms, and we'll talk about a couple other terms that you mentioned, and that is suffering with RA. And you mentioned in your book, and
I have feelings. I have feelings and
yeah,
thoughts.
feelings, feelings. You say, you share my life. You may share my life. I will accept that. I say in a voice that will not be denied, but you may not control it. And that's you talking to RA. And so what are your thoughts about like when people say like I'm an arthritis warrior or fighting arthritis or even the suffering with RA or even chronic illness and disability, like all these terms, what are your feelings about that? Because when I read about the suffering part, I agreed with that. I did.
I feel that words have power,
Yeah.
and the words you use about yourself and the role of RA tell you who you are. And I think if you say you're an RA sufferer, you have to find yourself as someone who suffers. And of course, there are times with RA where you suffer, but I don't suffer today. And that's why I always say I have RA. I am not an RA patient because I'm only a patient when I see my doctor. I'm not an RA sufferer because I don't suffer all the time. And I want to make sure that, and it's really hard to live a good life if you see yourself as someone who suffers, right?
Yeah.
And I'm bouncing a little now because so much of coping with RA and creating a good life is a mental game.
Mhm.
And one part of the game and one of your tools is how you refer to yourself. In terms of being an RA warrior or you're fighting RA, I think there are certainly times where calling yourself a warrior lends you the energy and power to keep going. But I also think it's exhausting, always defining RA as the enemy makes it, again, what kind of life is that to always have to fight an enemy? And I would like to ideally get to a point where RA and I can work together. And I give in that forward to the book, I talk about giving RA like the parameters of what they can do or what it can do. And I know sometimes I'm in control and other times it's in control, but it's a negotiation. And part of that negotiation, I think, is also that if you see RA as an enemy, because it affects your body, that often ripples to seeing your body as the enemy.
Yeah.
And it took me a really long time, like literal decades, to realize that my body is my partner and that it keeps going under this constant assault of inflammation. I and my body are not the same thing. My body is my body. And I think once I figured out that my body and I are partners, I started being nicer to my body. And that meant I ended up with more energy, weirdly. And that was a really revolutionary thing for me to kind of get to the point where it's like, no, wait, we work together. And that means my body has a vote of what we do today. Loving yourself and accepting yourself as you are instead of, and now we can get off in a sidetrack about the definition of normal and the definition of beauty. And somebody with a body like mine is often not seen as beautiful, but that's beauty standards. And I have no use for those because it's like, I look at my hands, I think they're beautiful. Are there changes? Yes, but they still work. Like, does they work well? Not so much, but it's like they are still there. They are still part of me. And I know I met a lot of women with RA who had joint changes and were ashamed of it and would hide their hands under the table or stop wearing their rings. And I'm like, flaunt them. Like, look what you've been through. These are your hands. Also, I don't know how to talk without my hands. So, so that just never happened. But it's like put on something sparkly
Yeah.
and enjoy your hands. So I think it's about seeing this whole thing. This is your body. It's yours. It's part of you. Don't hate yourself. Don't see yourself as somebody who betrayed you. It's like you'll get there.
And you have a master's in social work, so I wanted to know, like, did that background help you throughout the years after you received that diploma with your RA diagnosis? Or did it not really have an impact? Because I know now you kind of shifted gears and you're a writer and you're an author, you're working on books, you have this book out. So I just want to kind of talk about that transition, if it helped you, and then into your writing, career.
I actually, in a way, I started out wanting to be a firefighter, but I was 4 at the time. It was that or ballerina, I wasn't sure. But eventually it was like my parents told me, like, obviously, you're not going to be able to work in a job that's physical, but you have a mind and you should use it, right? And I wanted originally to become a therapist. And I wanted to help specifically teens with chronic illness and disability. And then I discovered policy when I went in for my master's. And I ended up kind of sidetracking off into human rights policy and program development. And I think it was the beginning. I think everything's a process. I think it was the beginning because it taught me, it was the beginning of learning advocacy skills on a bigger scale other than for me. And it was a beginning of externalizing barriers. Like if I couldn't participate in something, I think so often we blame ourselves or we blame the RA. And it's like, as a person with disability, there's something called the social model of disability that basically says my disability is created by the barriers in my environment. That if there were no barriers, I wouldn't be disabled. Would I use my body differently? Sure. But I think it was the beginning of seeing it from a wider point of view. And I think that introduced me to the possibility that my difficulties were sure related to my RA, but had more to do with a society that didn't account or consider my needs. So I think absolutely that was the beginning of it. And then I worked in that field for a while and lost my job due to political circumstances. We got a new government in Ontario and they repealed the law and I was out of a job. And then I had the big flare and decided that I'd always wanted to be a writer, like ever since I knew what stories were, that it wasn't just magic, somebody came up with them. And I kind of thought, okay, so when you get your life back, which I feel like I did, then you got to honor getting your life back and go for your dreams. And I think all of it, like the bachelor's in psychology, the experience in counseling, both receiving and giving counseling, the Masters of Social Work, and the policy. I think they all kind of contributed to what I do now. Advocacy, both on the individual and the social level. Trying to create a world where people like me don't have to go through the same things I did, and using my experience as a tool to remove some of those barriers.
Yeah, and you talk about that in your book. You want to show it off?
Sure.
You should. I'll show it off with you. You can see it.
Yeah, this is Your Life with Rheumatoid Arthritis, Managing Tools for Managing Treatment, Side Effects, and Pain. It is the first book in a projected 3-book series. I kind of got sidetracked a little for a while in doing other things, but I'm currently working on book 2.
We talked about this personally before, writer to writer, but what have kind of been like your challenges with writing, and how have you kind of overcome any obstacles in your way to kind of like keep that dream going?
Oh, where to start? I think there's the physical obstacles. I had to learn from other writers, but keep in mind that able-bodied writers are different from me. I think that when we see an interview with writers, it's often the kind of writers who are like John Grisham, Stephen King, people who write for a living.
Mhm.
And they talk about writing 4 or 5 hours a day, that they don't get up from the desk until they have 3,000 words. And if I would do that, I would wreck myself and not be able to write for another month. So, and it, until I figured out and listened to more writers who write differently, until I figured out that there is no rush, and that, like, it's a fable of the tortoise and the hare, right? Like, some people are hares and get there faster. I'm a tortoise, and as long as I keep going slow and steady, and then if I get interrupted by a flare or something else with my health, get back to writing as soon as I can, and just keep going, then I get there. Like, this book came from, I'd been on Biologics for a while, and I had kind of gotten out of the habit of planning for the future, because I was still living in that place where it felt like, the other shoe could drop any minute.
Mm.
And then actually 5 years in, after I first got on Enbro, I kind of went, okay, it's been 5 years. I think it's time to plan. And I got this idea that I should do a 5-year plan. And my 5-year plan was to have a book with my name on it. And then I went through several years of writing, and then not writing, and then writing, and then getting sidetracked again. And it was incredibly frustrating. But even with all of that, it only took 3 years to get my book out there. And what I also learned was it was better because of the sidetracks, because stopping meant I had time to think, that even if I was busy and didn't think I was thinking, there's still stuff going on in the back of your head.
Yeah, because you mentioned something last time, where like writing isn't only writing, it's thinking, collecting ideas, and yeah, through your experiences, you were able to add more things to the book that you probably wouldn't
Yes.
have if
Yeah.
you didn't have those setbacks, right?
Or I was able to think more deeply instead of rushing through it. And I think what I kind of set when I wrote this book, the goal I set myself was to write for an hour a day. And that writing isn't just about putting words into the manuscript, it is about thinking about writing, learning about writing, reading about writing, talking about writing with, like, get a writing buddy. It's a good idea. And all of that is writing. And if you do that for an hour a day, you are learning things and absorbing things that will help your writing when you actually get to the computer. And by seeing all these other elements as writing too and calling them valid, it meant that when I had a really bad day, I could read a book or listen to a podcast and go, okay, that's one other building block to writing.
Yeah, because even in your book, you talk about like the fatigue and the brain fog, and those are big setbacks when you're a writer, right? So if you're not you're having a bad day and there's just things like that, you can do other things on the side that'll help you
Yeah.
in the meantime, right? Because I mean, I think it's just it's difficult to have a career and live with a chronic illness, but people do it. You know, you just have to, like
Mhm.
you said, go about it a little differently and figure out a plan that works for you, you know. And I know you also told me once that like you didn't always have a computer, right? You wrote, you
Yeah.
know, your thesis papers by hand and
Yeah.
eventually you got a computer and you know, with the I don't really like to say like extensive damage in your hands because I have
You
that too.
can say that I have
Okay.
extensive damage in my
Okay.
hands.
How did you like come to sort of like maneuver that aspect of your physical body into writing? Because obviously sitting at the desk and with a laptop for hours on end isn't like really the best for your hands, right? So I know you mentioned you use like dragon speaking. Like, how do you kind of go about that? You know?
Well, yeah, you're right. Like not only did I grow up in the dark ages, I am from the dark ages, apparently before computers. And I did a lot of essay writing, etc., by hand, and then would type them up. And eventually I'd gotten a computer, I'd had it for several years, and Dragon Naturally Speaking became a thing. It wasn't very good in the beginning. It
Mhm.
really wasn't. And it and initially I didn't start using it much because it was just frustrating. And if I can say anything to anyone out there, it is start you if you have trouble in your hands, start using voice recognition software as soon as you can, because it's going to save your hands a lot of, I don't know, is part of this damage because I didn't, I don't know, hard to say. I think I would have less damage, whether it's joint wise or just like I also have uh kind of whiplash equivalent because of RA in my neck and the damage I had there in my shoulders. So I think had I started earlier, I think I would be able to handwrite better than I can now. But I still think that voice recognition software is a different way to write. I mean, if you can see me looking up there, it's because I'm thinking. I've
Mhm.
gotten into the habit, let me go back a little, typing a book or a story. I feel very much like there's a conduit from my kind of subconscious mind through my fingers. It just comes out. It's surprising. It's amazing. When a character does something you didn't know would happen. When you speak, your words travel through your conscious mind. And you have to figure out how to create by speaking, as you did by typing, and connect to that subconscious creative place. And for me, it happens by looking up here. And that's kind of why it happened. That's why I'm supposed to look there. But that's how it is habit by now, right? That if I am writing especially fiction, I sit like this, or I close my eyes. So I can't see the monitor because the minute I see the monitor and the words, my editor, the inner editor takes
Yeah, it takes you
over.
away from that magic. Because
Yeah,
writing is
and
magical, right? It is.
it absolutely is. And the editor has a place, but not while you're writing your
No.
first draft, because then the editor just stalls you out.
And you're working on a fiction book now.
I am. I'm working on my first novel.
Did you use this program when you wrote this book?
Yeah, I use Dragon Naturally Speaking for writing articles, for writing books, for writing social media posts. I use it for everything. You can also, also next to that, there's a voice typing in Google Docs, and Microsoft Word also has voice typing. I don't like them as much, but they are there.
They're there if you can't afford or can't
Yeah,
have access to dragon speaking yet.
yeah.
So it wasn't as hard to write a nonfiction book using this because it was more like it was less from the subconscious mind and more through the conscious mind. Is that
It was a lot more logical. It was a
Yeah.
lot like, for instance, the difference between in writing, there's two terms: that you're plotter, which means you outline your book, or you're pantser, which means you write by the seat of your pants.
Yeah.
And it turns out that when I write nonfiction, I'm a plotter, but I write fiction as a pantser, which is very confusing. But it is like, at the time I was writing articles, as well. I was working freelance, writing articles and columns for Health Central and a couple of other places. And the switch to the fiction place in my head, because they live in two different places in your mind, in my experience, and I couldn't do the switch. So I thought, okay, let's do nonfiction then. And that helped me get started on my book.
In the beginning, you dedicate it to your parents. I know that you say that they were motivation for you to continue living life
Mhm,
on your terms, right?
mhm.
And so do you want to say a little bit about that? Like how, because like I guess like what I wanted to say before is that like when I was seeing occupational therapists and stuff, right? In the beginning years, and I told them I wanted to be a writer. And they're like, oh, well, your hands, like maybe you should reconsider. Like, did you ever have
Sorry, did I
that?
roll my eyes? That it felt like it was all the way to the back of my head.
Yeah. Did you ever have that with people in your life, like your parents, or which I don't think you did, obviously, but did you ever experience that with people kind of
Oh yeah,
their limiting beliefs on you, and how did
all
people
the
in your
time,
life sort of
all the
encourage
time.
you to go past that?
All, like, it started like, without my parents, I wouldn't be where I am now, because my parents, and this is something that's really important, both of adults, but also of children with chronic illness, is that there should be expectations, because that's how you keep going. Like, the expectations of doing something more than being sick is what keeps you going, right? And I think my parents, like I said, they always, not only did they say, you have a mind, use it, but they also expected me to, and they supported me. I'm lucky in that. I had been in the hospital as a teen until I was about 16 for several years, waiting for hip replacements.
Mm.
That's another long story. And when it became time to get discharged, there were people on the team, on the medical team, who talked to my mother about putting me in a group home, because there was no way she possibly could help me. And she basically told them to imagine words that start with F.
Yeah.
And said, no,
As
she's
you
coming
should.
home.
As you
Yeah, she's coming home. My dad, basically, he went to work, and it was a fairly traditional household as it was in the time, but
should.
also it was like, he brought in the money and she did the stuff at home, including my care, most of it. And that meant I could go to high school with my peers, and then go to university, and then we moved over here.
Yeah.
But like you, the people who have tended to underestimate me and try to hold me back and try to get me to not dream big, the opposite, don't dream at all, have always been medical people. Like,
Mm.
do I meet strangers who don't know me, who have the same ideas? Sure. But the people who have always suggested that, maybe I wait with, going to university, maybe I wait with this, or maybe I set my sights a little lower, or a lot lower. It's people who don't know me, who look at me and go, and don't have any ideas about flexibility. And I find it really surprising that an occupational therapist would be saying, oh, but your hands, because their job is to find different ways of doing things,
Yeah.
right? I'm like, who are you? Stop it.
Yeah. And
Because
back then too, my hands weren't even that like progressive or damaged or,
yeah.
quote unquote deformed, which I hate that word, but it just
Oh, the D word, I
yeah,
hate it. And that's
I
why
hate
I just say joint changes. Like,
yeah.
my entire life, like, you go into a doctor's office, or somebody else, and you go, yeah, you come from, you're having a good day, you got an A on an essay, or somebody's complimented something you wrote, and then you go in and they say, oh, you have a lot of deformities, and instantly it
Mhm.
just feels like getting stabbed in the stomach.
Oh, that bothers you? Because I wasn't sure how to phrase like damage in the hands, because I know that's a sensitive topic for people. I mean, even if you've been living with it for so long, I feel like it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Everyone's kind of,
No, I think terminology bothers me. I think the medical profession needs to review how they say things. I think deformities is an old term.
yeah.
I think joint changes is more neutral. I think that things like doctor's orders should be eradicated. A compliant patient, they don't bite. They just, you're not the boss of me. I make decisions. I am not compliant with your orders. You are
Yeah, we
not.
have to work together, right? To like,
Yes.
and
Well,
we're
and more
also in the
than that,
driver's seat, right?
exactly. Like my medical team is a team, but I'm the lead
Yeah.
because it's my life. And I think coming back to my parents' influence, like my family, we have a overdeveloped, you're not the boss of me-itis, all
Mhm.
of us. But it's what keeps you going, right? And it's what keeps me coming in to see a new doctor and making it clear that I respect their expertise, but I make the decisions,
Yeah, and you know,
right?
it's surprising that your mom was sort of medically gaslighted, like 'cause we don't really get to hear a lot about like the parents' perspective and their
No.
stories and how your mom was sort of brushed off, and even like even if women back then and even women now are still brushed off,
Oh, yeah.
well, it's just anxiety, blah blah blah. You
Yeah.
know, even on social media too, going back to the hand terminology, like I've seen other people, like advocates or other people living with arthritis, say, "Oh, if it wasn't for medication, my hands would be deformed or crippled," and
Mm.
that's not necessarily true either, because I mean, for me, yeah, I was on biologics right when they came out in 2005, but my hands were still damaged down the line, but that was other reasons, you know?
Yep.
So it is what it is. And I think that kind of goes to the end of your book too, when you say like, don't make a self-pity party a lifestyle. And I really like love that, because so often we can become like, you know, in that pity party and stay in that little pond for too long. And I've been guilty of that too.
Don't make it a lifestyle, but there's nothing wrong with having moments of self-pity because
Yeah.
RA is hard. And I call it taking a swish. Like taking a swish in its self-pity pool, dipping your toes, splashing around a bit, but know when to get out and know when to say, okay, I've had the feelings, I've expressed them. Because if you don't, they just sit there and fester. And you've had a good cry and you've eaten your ice cream and then get back on the horse that's for you, right?
Yeah,
And I think, like you said, that's kind of the way you live your life. It's like the feelings are there. It's hard.
it is hard. Yeah.
It is suffering sometimes, but not all the time. And I think once you recognize that it's not all the time, then you know that things get better. And I meet a lot of people who are in the early stages of RA and who are like, oh my God, why doesn't this change? And it's like even before biologics, I know that RA ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's full throttle, and sometimes it says, okay, I'm done, and then wanders off, right?
Leaves you
So,
alone. Sometimes
right?
forever, sometimes for weeks or months or years. Yeah.
Yeah, like sometimes it just kind of goes quiet and then comes back again. And it's like, and you keep learning. You keep learning how to cope. You keep learning what to do. And every time RA is hard, you learn something, and it's resilience. And I wish we didn't have to be that damn resilient, but it is also a strength.
And one thing you said too at the right end, you said hope, and you quoted the Emily Dickinson quote, the thing with feathers. And I just want to
Mm,
read this. And it says, it is what allows you to spread your wings and fly. Hope, that is, right? Nourish the hope within you, look forward, never back, and every day practice seeing the beauty and joy in life. It is all around you in the smile of a loved one's face, and the sunlight filtering through green leaves, and the taste of a ripe peach or really good chocolate or ice cream, as you were saying. And it's basically all over. Like there's beauty in everything, even though we're having these situations happen to us, right? And things that are out of our control. Um, and
mm,
so that's kind of like what I wanted to leave at. And like, um, I wanted to ask too, like, what, like, has anyone said anything like so like positive about your book that it really touched you? Like, because this has been out for a while, right?
Yes, 10
Um,
years.
yeah, you have some great reviews and it's on Amazon and you guys can probably find out more about Lena on her blog, see the Seated View, but I also wanted to ask about that too quickly, but the Seated View along with the book, like what inspired you? Obviously your journey with RA, but what really made you want to write the book? Like was there a pivotal moment? Was it based off your blog? Because as I said before, like even when I was diagnosed in the beginning years, like you were one of the first blogs I saw. You were one of the first people that I was like reading about, and it's like so surreal that I'm talking to you right
I,
now.
I
You
know.
know, so I just didn't know like what it, because like for me, I started my blog in 2016 while I was healing from knee surgery. After years of not wanting to talk about it, hating discussing it with friends, like I wouldn't even tell new people I met. I kept it like my secret, and I only had a handful of people know. But after seeing you and other people talk openly about their experiences and sharing their emotions, I was inspired to do the same. So was there a similar situation with your book, with your blog? Have people reached out to you about like your work? You know what I mean? So, I mean, obviously, I'm sure you've had critics too. Everyone has critiques, but we don't have to pay attention to that. But I'm just saying, like,
Sure, we
you know,
can.
yeah.
Uh, but it depends. If it's valid, then yes. If you look
Yeah.
at it and go, yeah, but eh, then not.
Right.
Um, I think the blog, when I started the blog, it was when blogging became big the first time. And a lot of people I knew had blogs. And I kind of got sucked into knitting blogs at first.
Mhm.
And then I kind of went, this is fun. And I have a lot of opinions I like to share if you didn't notice. And I think I think that's where the seed of you came from. I had a lot of time to think, right? Or I did, especially not so much anymore, but I did at the time. I wasn't working. I was just a few months into taking a medication that worked, and I was feeling better. And a friend of mine basically said, okay, you need a blog, and here it is, set it up for me. And I'm like, but okay. Um, and then like when it came to considering like what to call it, is this one thing I've learned is that having a visible disability gives you a different point of view. Partly physically, because I'm on a lower level, different level. And I kind of think about things a little differently. So it became the seated view. And that's how that got its name. And in terms of the book, it really was that whole moment of, as I talked about before, that all right, I literally got my life back. What am I going to do with it to honor the gift? Like it's a very almost sacred thing for me that I found this medication that works, that literally and metaphorically saved my life, because I had made plans to kill myself
Mhm.
because I just couldn't. It was the only thing that got me through this immense flare was the thought of being able to stop it. Like I kind of had this, if I don't get the medication and it doesn't work in 6 months, I can say I can call it, right? So then being given this medication that helps me see the beauty in life again was quite literally a miracle. And it's like you kind of have to honor that. You have to do something with that. You can't just lollygag your way around life, right? And it was a moment where until then I'd had all sorts of good reasons to not write the book I wanted to write. And it was sort of like, okay, well, what are you going as Mary Oliver said, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And that was a point where I went, I'm going to write a book. And we'll see what happens. And then a bunch of things happened over the 3 years I wrote it that um, I had initially intended to publish it traditionally. And then ebooks happened.
Mm.
And independent publishing, not vanity publishing, but independent publishing, like actually taking it
Right.
seriously and publishing through Amazon, for instance, happened. And I kind of looked at reality of being a new author versus doing it yourself, and just went, I think this will work better. So I went the independent publisher route, and now I'm kind of changed. Like, I would still want to do that, but I also hope to publish traditionally, so eventually become a hybrid author, which I sidetracked. As I mentioned, I sidetracked, but I think it was this whole, like, put up or shut up, you know? Are you going to find another excuse to not write the book that you say you have in you, or you are going to actually be serious about it?
Mhm.
So
And then you are clearly, because you're doing
yeah.
more, you know,
Well,
but
and
yeah.
I took myself seriously, and I think, like, we're back to, how do you write with a chronic illness? How do you write at all? I think it's about taking yourself seriously as an author and say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and not say, well, I'm writing a book, but who am I to do that? But
Mhm.
like, who are you to, like, there's a statistic that I can't remember, but a lot of people say they want to write a book, and about this whole big group who claim, oh yeah, I want to write a book someday, because we all met them. Only about 1% actually do it. So be that 1%. But
Yeah.
you're already pretty unique because of RA. Why not be unique because of something else, right?
Right. Add it to the resume, right?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I really had a good chat with you today. I'm glad that you came on.
Okay.
It's been a long time coming. And again, people that are watching, go grab Lena's book, Your Life with Rheumatoid Arthritis, and Tools for Managing Treatment, Side Effects, and Pain. You're not going to regret this purchase, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you very much. And also go see my interview with Effie on my YouTube channel.
Oh, yes,
Because
yes.
that's how we
Good one.
started this whole thing.
Yeah, we started this whole little chat saga from that
Yeah.
time. And that was what, 2, 3 months ago. Yeah. So I'll link that below too. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. This was
Thank you,
wonderful.
Lena. Thank you.